The emergency beacon cut through the silence of deep space like a knife through silk. Ambassador Kexthari of the Velonian Republic pressed her six-fingered hand against the communication console, her blue skin pale with fear. The message she was about to send would either save her people or doom them all. "This is Ambassador Kexthari of the Velonian Republic, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies," she began, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. "We are under attack by the Zephyrian Collective. Our defenses have fallen. Our fleets are destroyed. We have perhaps days before complete annihilation. We formally request assistance from any civilized species capable of military intervention." She paused, knowing what came next would shock the galaxy. "We specifically request aid from the species known as humans. We know they are considered dangerous. We know they come from a death world. We no longer care. Please, if any humans can hear this message, we need your help." The transmission ended, and Kexthari slumped in her chair. Around her, the command center of Velonia Prime buzzed with desperate activity. Military officers with their distinctive scaled skin moved frantically between stations, coordinating the evacuation of civilian populations to underground shelters. The air recyclers struggled to keep up with the acrid smoke drifting in from the burning sections of the capital city. General Vorthak approached her station, his usually pristine uniform torn and stained with green blood. Ambassador was that wise? The humans, their reputation. Kexthari looked up at him with tired eyes. "General, 3 days ago we had the fourth largest military in the galaxy. Today we have 17 functional ships and maybe 2 million ground troops left. The Zephyrians have 800 vessels in orbit and more arriving every hour. At this point, I would accept help from the Void Spawn themselves." The general's scaled face showed his conflict, but he nodded grimly. Everyone in the command center had seen the reports from the outer colonies. The Zephyrian Collective didn't just conquer, they harvested. Every living being on conquered worlds was either enslaved or processed into biological components for their war machines. Death was sometimes the mercy. "How long until they begin the final assault?" Kexthari asked. 47 hours, maybe less. They're moving slower than usual, probably to savor our fear." Vorthak's voice carried decades of military discipline, but she could hear the underlying despair. "They know we can't hurt them anymore." Across the galaxy, the emergency transmission spread through communication networks like ripples in a pond. Most species that received it shook their heads sadly and moved on. The Velonian Republic had been a proud, peaceful civilization, known for their art and philosophy. But they had made the fatal mistake of possessing resources the Zephyrian Collective wanted. The Zephyrians were not evil in the traditional sense. They were simply efficient. They had evolved on a world where resources were scarce and competition was everything. Over millions of years, they had developed into the perfect predatory civilization. They took what they needed and eliminated what they didn't. Emotion, mercy, and art were weaknesses they had evolved beyond. Their ships were living things, grown rather than built, with hulls that could heal damage and weapons that fired concentrated death. Their warriors were enhanced with biotechnology that made them faster, stronger, and more resilient than any natural being. Most importantly, they were patient. They would spend months studying a target, learning every weakness before striking with overwhelming force. On the industrial world of Carthax, the message reached the Emergency Council of the Terran Colonial Administration. The humans had been in space for only 300 years, but they had established 13 colonies and built a modest but growing fleet. They were still considered newcomers by most galactic civilizations. Admiral Sarah Chen read the transmission twice before looking up at her assembled staff. The command room was utilitarian, all function and no decoration, very much in the human style that other species found disturbingly practical. "Opinions?" she asked simply. Colonel Marcus Webb, head of Colonial Marines, spoke first. "Ma'am, we've been tracking Zephyrian expansion for 2 years. They're methodical. They'll strip Velonia down to the bedrock, then move on to the next target. If we let them finish there, they'll have resources for an even bigger fleet." "The political situation is complicated," added Director Lisa Park from Colonial Intelligence. "Half the galaxy thinks we're barely civilized savages. The other half thinks we're a potential threat. If we intervene in Velonia, it sends a message." Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair. She was a small woman, barely 5.5 feet tall, but she had earned her position through 30 years of military service, and a mind that could process tactical situations faster than most computers. What's the tactical situation? Webb brought up a holographic display showing the Velonia system. Red dots representing Zephyrian ships swarmed around the blue dot of Velonia Prime like antibodies attacking an infection. 812 confirmed enemy vessels, with more arriving. Mix of cruisers, destroyers, and their bioships. They've got orbital control and are systematically destroying military installations before beginning the harvest. Our assets. Third Fleet is on maneuvers near the Kepler Junction, about 6 days out at maximum burn. That's 8 heavy cruisers, 24 destroyers, and 42 support vessels. Total complement of 32,000 personnel. Chen studied the display silently. By any rational analysis, it was hopeless. The humans would be outnumbered more than 10 to 1, fighting an enemy that had never been defeated in open battle. Every military doctrine said this was suicide. There's something else, Director Park added quietly. Our intelligence suggests this isn't just about Velonia. The Zephyrians have been probing defenses along the entire outer rim. If they succeed here, they'll have the resources and momentum for a much larger campaign. Eventually, that campaign will reach human space. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the large window that looked out over the shipyards of Carthax. In the distance, she could see the construction frames where new ships were slowly taking shape. Humanity was still building its strength, still learning its place in a galaxy that seemed hostile to newcomers. Ma'am, Colonel Webb said carefully, there's one more thing. The Velonians specifically requested human assistance. That's unusual. Why would they do that? Chen asked. Because they're desperate, Director Park answered. But also because they've heard the stories about what happened at Proxima Station, about the siege of New Kyoto, about how humans fight when everything is on the line. Admiral Chen remembered those battles. Proxima Station, where a single human destroyer had held off a pirate fleet for 18 hours until reinforcements arrived, ramming 2 enemy ships when its weapons failed. New Kyoto, where colonial marines had fought a retreating action for 3 weeks against impossible odds, buying time for civilian evacuation. The other species think we're dangerous because we come from a death world, she said quietly. They're not entirely wrong. Earth taught us that sometimes survival requires doing terrible things, but it also taught us that some things are worth dying for. She turned back to her staff. Send a message to Third Fleet. They are to proceed to the Velonia system at maximum speed. Send another message to Colonial Command on Earth. We need every available ship, and we need them now. Ma'am, Webb said, even with every ship we have, we'll still be outnumbered 8 to 1. Admiral Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that reminded everyone present why humans had earned their reputation among the stars. Colonel, we've been outnumbered before. The trick isn't to avoid the fight, it's to make sure you're fighting it on your terms. Back in the Velonia system, Ambassador Kexthari received word that their message had reached human space. The response was brief and transmitted in simple galactic standard. Help is coming. Hold on. She shared the message with General Vorthak, who read it with a mixture of hope and terror. Everyone had heard stories about human military capabilities, though it was hard to separate fact from fiction. Some said humans were barely controlled berserkers who fought with suicidal courage. Others claimed they were tactical geniuses who could win through cunning when brute force failed. What everyone agreed on was that humans were unpredictable. They came from a world where everything was trying to kill them, where the weather itself was a weapon, where survival required constant adaptation and innovation. They had brought those qualities with them to the stars. How long until they arrive? The general asked. Unknown, the message didn't include an estimated arrival time. Kexthari looked out at the burning skyline of her capital city. I hope it's soon. High above Velonia Prime, Zephyrian Hive Commander Vrexthal monitored the planet's communications with mild interest. The desperate plea for help was exactly what he expected from a dying civilization. It would make the harvest more efficient if the prey exhausted itself in futile hope, rather than forcing his ships to hunt down every survivor. The mention of humans was curious but not concerning. His intelligence indicated they were a minor species with limited military capability. If they were foolish enough to intervene, his fleet would simply destroy them and add their biomass to the harvest. The collective had faced many species that thought themselves warriors. All had been consumed in the end. Vrexthal was a perfect example of Zephyrian evolution. His original form had been enhanced with biomechanical implants that made him faster than a striking serpent, stronger than a mining robot, and more durable than ship armor. His mind had been augmented with tactical processing nodes that could calculate optimal battle strategies in milliseconds. Emotion had been surgically removed from his brain stem, leaving only pure efficiency. He reviewed the orbital assault plan with satisfaction. Phase 1 would eliminate the remaining military installations. Phase 2 would target infrastructure and communications. Phase 3 would begin the population harvest, starting with the most productive individuals and working down to children and the elderly. It was a clean, efficient process that the collective had refined over thousands of conquests. There would be no unnecessary cruelty, no wasted resources, no complications. The Velonians would simply cease to exist, their biomass and technology incorporated into the ever-growing strength of the collective. The mention of humans requesting assistance was filed away as a minor footnote. If they arrived, they would be dealt with appropriately. On the surface of Velonia Prime, the countdown to extinction continued. Civilian shelters overflowed with refugees from the outer cities. Medical centers struggled to treat the wounded from the constant bombardment. The planet's defensive grid, once the pride of Velonian engineering, had been systematically destroyed by surgical strikes from orbit. Ambassador Kexthari made her way through the underground command bunker, visiting different sections to maintain morale. She stopped at the communications center, where junior officers monitored channels for any sign of approaching help. "Anything?" she asked hopefully. Senior Communications Officer Yalzeth shook her head sadly. "Nothing yet, Ambassador. We're tracking several ships moving toward our system, but they're still days away. The closest is a Terran fleet, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" "Ma'am, according to our sensors, it's a small force, maybe 70 ships, against what the Zephyrians have in orbit." Kexthari felt her heart sink. 70 ships against 800 was still hopeless, even if the humans had the military prowess their reputation suggested. She had hoped that calling for human assistance would somehow bring salvation, but perhaps she had only succeeded in inviting another species to share in Velonia's destruction. "Continue monitoring," she said quietly, "and keep broadcasting our position. If they're coming to help us, they'll need to know where to find survivors." She returned to her command post and stared at the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet maintained perfect formation above her world, a constellation of death that blotted out the stars. In 36 hours, they would begin the final phase of their harvest. In 48 hours, Velonian civilization would exist only in historical records. Unless something changed. Unless the humans were everything the stories claimed they were. Unless 70 ships could somehow defeat 800. Kexthari closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she had seen a sunrise without the shadow of enemy vessels blocking the light. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 3 days. Somewhere in the cold void between stars, Admiral Chen's Third Fleet burned hard toward Velonia, their fusion engines leaving trails of light in the darkness. In the flagship's command center, tactical officers worked around the clock to develop strategies that might give them even the smallest chance of success. The odds were still impossible, but humans had faced impossible odds before. And sometimes, just sometimes, impossible wasn't the same thing as hopeless. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the TCS Indomitable, watching the tactical display update in real time as her fleet approached the Velonia system. The numbers hadn't improved. If anything, they had gotten worse. Intelligence now estimated over 900 Zephyrian vessels in the system, with more arriving every few hours. "Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission from the planet's surface," reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Torres. "It's weak, heavily encrypted, but we can clean it up." "Put it through." Ambassador Kexthari's voice filled the command center, strained and tired but still carrying the dignity of her office. "To any human vessels approaching Velonia Prime, I am Ambassador Kexthari. We have approximately 30 hours before the Zephyrians begin the final harvest phase. Military resistance has been eliminated. We have approximately 4 million civilians in emergency shelters, but they won't hold against a determined assault." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, Chen could hear the desperation. "We know the odds you face. We know we are asking you to die for people you have never met. If you wish to withdraw, we understand. But if you can give us even a few more hours, perhaps some of our children might escape to the outer settlements." The communication ended, leaving the command center in silence. Chen looked around at her officers, reading the determination in their faces. These were career military personnel who had volunteered for deep space service knowing the risks. They had signed up to protect human colonies, but they had also sworn an oath to defend innocent life wherever they found it. "Captain Williams," Chen addressed her flag captain, "what's our ETA?" 26 hours at current burn, Admiral, but we're pushing the engines beyond safe parameters. Some of the older destroyers are already showing strain." "Commander Santos," she turned to her chief tactical officer, "final assessment of enemy capabilities." Commander Elena Santos brought up a detailed analysis on the main display. The Zephyrian fleet consists primarily of bioships, grown rather than built. They're tough, self-repairing, and equipped with plasma weapons that can cut through most known armor. Their command structure is hive-minded. Each ship can act independently, but they coordinate perfectly. She highlighted different sections of the enemy fleet. The core of their formation consists of 12 massive hive ships, each one capable of carrying thousands of warriors and providing tactical coordination. Surrounding them are approximately 200 heavy cruisers, 400 destroyers, and the rest are support vessels and troop carriers. "Weaknesses?" Chen asked. "That's harder to determine. Zephyrian biotechnology is largely immune to electromagnetic weapons. Their ships can repair battle damage in real time. They don't seem to have psychological weaknesses in the traditional sense. No fear, no hesitation, no morale to break." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "What about their tactics?" "Highly predictable, which is both a strength and a potential weakness. They always follow the same pattern: orbital bombardment to eliminate military targets, systematic destruction of infrastructure, then harvest operations. They're efficient but not creative. And they've never faced humans in a fleet engagement before," added Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander Park. Chen walked to the forward viewport and stared out at the stars ahead. Somewhere beyond that darkness, an entire civilization waited to die, trusting that humanity would somehow find a way to save them. "Admiral," Captain Williams said quietly, "I have to ask, even with surprise, even with superior tactics, how do we defeat a force this size with 70 ships?" Chen turned back to her officers, and they saw something in her expression that made them straighten unconsciously. "Captain, you're thinking like a traditional military force. The Zephyrians are thinking like a traditional military force. We're not going to fight them ship to ship and try to win through superior firepower." She moved to the tactical display and began highlighting different areas of the system. "The Zephyrians have made one crucial mistake. They're so confident in their overwhelming force that they've positioned themselves for maximum efficiency rather than maximum defense. They've spread their fleet across the entire system to prevent escape and coordinate the harvest." Commander Santos leaned forward. "You want to attack specific targets rather than engage the main fleet." "I want to turn their strength against them," Chen replied. "Look at their formation. It's perfect for controlling a solar system. It's terrible for responding to multiple simultaneous threats. We're not going to fight 900 ships at once. We're going to fight 20 ships at a time in 20 different locations, faster than they can coordinate a response." Lieutenant Commander Park pulled up a strategic analysis. "Ma'am, that would require splitting our fleet into multiple task forces. We'd be even more outnumbered in each engagement." "Yes, but we'd be choosing when and where those engagements happen. The Zephyrians have all their eggs in one basket, but the basket is spread across an entire solar system. If we can move fast enough, hit hard enough, and stay unpredictable enough, we can do serious damage before they adapt." Captain Williams studied the display. "What about their hive ships? Those are their command and control centers if we can take them out." "Exactly. Without central coordination, their fleet becomes just a collection of individual ships. Dangerous ships, but not the perfectly coordinated force that makes them nearly invincible." Chen moved back to the center of the command room. "Here's the plan. We're going to drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and immediately split into 7 task forces. Each task force will target a different section of their fleet, focusing on command vessels and support infrastructure." She began outlining the strategy in detail. "Task Force Alpha will target their orbital shipyards above Velonia's moon. Those facilities are producing reinforcements and repair materials. Task Force Beta will hit their supply convoy in the outer system. Task Force Charlie will assault their sensor stations on the asteroid belt. Ma'am, interrupted Commander Santos, this is essentially a suicide mission for the task forces. Even if we succeed in our initial objectives, the Zephyrians will converge on us with overwhelming force. Not if we don't stay in any one place long enough for them to converge. Each task force will have a 30-minute window for their primary objective, then jump out and move to secondary targets. We keep moving, keep hitting them where they don't expect, until we've degraded their coordination enough to make a run at the hive ships. The assembled officers absorbed this information, running calculations and considering implications. Finally, Captain Williams spoke. Admiral, this plan requires perfect timing, flawless execution, and more luck than any reasonable person should count on. Chen smiled grimly. Captain, we're 70 ships against 900, trying to save a civilization we barely know, in a solar system we've never seen before. If we were reasonable people, we'd have stayed home. She activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In 24 hours, we will engage a Zephyrian fleet that outnumbers us more than 10 to 1. The enemy expects us to follow traditional military doctrine, to mass our forces and attempt a direct assault. Instead, we're going to do what humans do best. We're going to be unpredictable. Across the fleet, 32,000 men and women listened as their admiral explained the plan that might save Velonia Prime, or might get them all killed in the attempt. I won't lie to you, Chen continued. This is dangerous. Some of us won't be coming home, but the Velonians called for help and we answered. Not because we had to, not because it was profitable, but because it was right. Today we remind the galaxy why humans are worth fearing and why we're worth respecting. The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Across 70 ships, crews began final preparations for what would either be remembered as humanity's greatest military victory or its most glorious failure. On Velonia Prime, Ambassador Kexthari received a new transmission from the approaching human fleet. It was brief and characteristically direct. ETA 24 hours. Evacuate all civilians from orbital facilities and prepare for extended combat operations. Do not surrender. Help is coming. She shared the message with General Vorthak, who read it with amazement. They're really coming. 70 ships against 900. Either they're insane or they know something we don't, Kexthari replied. Given their reputation, it might be both. High above the planet, Hive Commander Vrexthal received reports of the approaching human fleet with the cold calculation that characterized his species. His tactical nodes processed the information and concluded that the humans represented no significant threat. 70 ships against 900 was not a battle, it was an execution. He issued orders to intercept the human fleet with a mobile strike force of 100 ships, while the remainder of his forces continued preparation for the harvest. The humans would be destroyed before they could even enter the system proper, adding their biomass to the collective's resources. It was efficient, it was logical, it was exactly what the Zephyrians always did when faced with inferior opposition. Which was exactly what Admiral Chen was counting on. 23 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velonia system. Immediately, the tactical situation became clear. The Zephyrian response was precisely what Chen had predicted: 100 ships moving to intercept, while the rest maintained their positions around the planet. All ships execute Plan Delta, Chen commanded. Task forces separate on my mark. The human fleet exploded into motion, 7 groups of ships accelerating in different directions at velocities that surprised the Zephyrian commanders. The bioships were fast, but they hadn't expected the humans to split their forces and move with such desperate speed. Task Force Alpha, led by Captain Morrison on the destroyer TCS Fury, burned hard toward the orbital shipyards above Velonia's largest moon. Their objective was to destroy the construction facilities that were building replacement ships for the Zephyrian fleet. Task Force Beta, under Captain Rodriguez, aimed for the supply convoy bringing fresh biomass and weapon components from conquered systems. Without supplies, even the self-repairing bioships would eventually be worn down. Task Force Charlie targeted the sensor stations that provided early warning and tactical coordination for the Zephyrian fleet. Commander Thompson knew that destroying those stations would create blind spots in their coverage. As the task forces spread out across the system, the Zephyrian response began to show the first signs of confusion. Their intercept force found itself chasing multiple targets moving in different directions at maximum burn. For the first time in their military history, they couldn't concentrate overwhelming force against a single target. "Admiral," reported Commander Santos, "the Zephyrians are adapting. They're splitting their intercept force to pursue our task forces." "Good," Chen replied. "That means instead of facing 100 ships with 70, we're facing 15 ships with 10 in 7 different locations. Those are much better odds." The first engagement began when Task Force Alpha reached the orbital shipyards. Captain Morrison brought his 10 ships in fast and low, using the moon's gravity well to accelerate beyond the design limits of his engines. "All ships target the construction matrices," Morrison commanded. "Ignore the defensive platforms. We're not here to fight, we're here to break things." The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Nuclear torpedoes and particle beams struck the delicate biomechanical structures that grew new ships for the Zephyrian fleet. Explosions blossomed across the orbital facilities as decades of construction was destroyed in minutes. The Zephyrian defenders responded quickly, but their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not defending stationary targets. By the time they could bring their guns to bear, the human task force was already accelerating away, leaving wreckage and fire behind them. Similar scenes played out across the system as each task force struck its assigned target and withdrew before the enemy could mount an effective defense. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zephyrians were reacting instead of acting. But the cost was already becoming apparent. 3 human ships had been destroyed in the initial strikes, and several more showed damage from Zephyrian retaliation. The enemy was adapting, learning, beginning to anticipate human tactics. "Ma'am," Captain Williams reported, "we've completed Phase 1, but the Zephyrians are repositioning. They're pulling ships back from the outer system to create a defensive perimeter around their hive ships." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the enemy fleet began to contract into a tighter formation. "They're learning. Time for Phase 2. She opened a channel to all task forces. "All units, execute convergence pattern Omega. Target priority is hive ships. This is where it gets interesting." Across the Velonia system, 7 groups of human ships changed course simultaneously, accelerating toward the heart of the Zephyrian fleet, where the massive hive ships waited like sleeping giants among a constellation of smaller vessels. The real battle was about to begin. The convergence of 7 human task forces on the Zephyrian Command Center created a tactical situation that no military academy in the galaxy had ever simulated. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as her 70 ships accelerated toward the heart of an enemy fleet that still outnumbered them more than 10 to 1. "Distance to target?" she asked. 47 minutes at current burn rate," reported Navigator Lieutenant Chang. "But ma'am, the Zephyrians are repositioning. They're creating overlapping fields of fire around their hive ships." Chen studied the enemy formation with cold calculation. The Zephyrians had pulled back from their system-wide deployment and formed a dense protective sphere around their 12 massive command vessels. It was a logical response to the human strategy, but it also represented an opportunity. "They're thinking like prey now," she murmured. "Good." Commander Santos looked up from her tactical console. "Admiral, I'm reading massive energy buildups from the hive ships. They're charging weapons systems that we've never seen before." "Specifications?" "Unknown, ma'am. The energy readings are off our scales. Whatever those weapons are, they're not designed for ship-to-ship combat. They're designed for something bigger." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "Planet crackers?" "Possibly, or population elimination weapons. If they can't harvest Velonia Prime intact, they might be preparing to sterilize it rather than let anyone escape." The tactical situation suddenly became clear with horrible clarity. The Zephyrians weren't just defending their command ships, they were protecting weapons capable of destroying an entire world. If the human attack failed, they would simply murder every living thing on Velonia Prime and move on to their next target. "All task forces, this is Admiral Chen," she broadcast to her fleet. "Priority update. The Hive ships are charging weapons capable of planetary destruction. This is no longer a rescue mission. This is a race against time. Across the fleet, crews that had already accepted the possibility of death now faced the certainty that failure meant watching an entire civilization die before their eyes. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every ship began pushing their engines beyond safety limits, trading caution for speed. Task Force Alpha, still under Captain Morrison's command, was the first to engage the outer defensive perimeter. His 10 ships came in from multiple vectors, forcing the Zephyrian defenders to split their fire. The bioships responded with their characteristic efficiency, but for the first time, they were facing an enemy that refused to behave predictably. "Serpentine pattern Delta," Morrison commanded. "Don't give them a stable target." The human ships began a complex weaving pattern that had been developed during the asteroid wars, designed to defeat tracking systems and automated weapons. The Zephyrian plasma cannon were devastatingly effective against ships flying straight lines, but struggled to predict the seemingly random course changes of human vessels. "Direct hit on Zephyrian cruiser designated Alpha 7, reported Weapons Officer Lieutenant Kim. "She's venting atmosphere and falling behind formation." "Good shooting. All ships concentrate fire on the wounded vessel. Take her down before she can regenerate." The focused fire from Task Force Alpha overwhelmed the damaged bioship's repair systems, and the massive vessel broke apart in a spectacular explosion that sent shockwaves through both fleets. It was the first Zephyrian ship destroyed in the engagement, and the psychological impact was significant. On the bridge of the lead Hive ship, Hive Commander Vrexthal observed the destruction of one of his cruisers with something approaching surprise. His tactical analysis indicated that the loss was due to coordinated fire from multiple smaller vessels, a tactic that the collective's databases suggested was inefficient compared to single large weapons. Yet the humans had made it work. He issued orders to tighten the defensive formation and increase fire coordination between vessels. The humans were demonstrating tactical creativity that his models hadn't anticipated, but creativity alone wouldn't overcome the fundamental mathematics of the situation. Task Force Beta, led by Captain Rodriguez, approached from the opposite side of the Zephyrian formation, targeting the defensive vessels that protected the Hive ship's flanks. Rodriguez had earned her command during the siege of New Kyoto, where her destroyer had held off an entire pirate squadron through clever use of asteroid cover and superior gunnery. "Ma'am, we're detecting movement in the enemy formation," reported her tactical officer. "Looks like they're trying to rotate to bring more guns to bear." Rodriguez studied the display with the eye of someone who had spent 20 years learning how to fight impossible odds. They're not used to dealing with multiple threats simultaneously. Their coordination is breaking down. She was right. The Zephyrian hive mind was extraordinarily efficient at coordinating large numbers of identical units performing similar tasks. But the human strategy of multiple simultaneous attacks from different vectors was straining their command and control systems. "All ships target their coordination nodes," Rodriguez ordered. "Those antenna-like projections on their hulls. If we can disrupt their communications, they'll have to fight as individual ships instead of a coordinated fleet." The human ships focused their fire on the seemingly minor targets, causing what appeared to be minimal damage to the massive bioships. But the effects quickly became apparent as the Zephyrian formation began to show signs of confusion and delayed responses. Task Forces Charlie and Delta engaged simultaneously from above and below the enemy formation, creating a three-dimensional battle that pushed Zephyrian tactical processing to its limits. Commander Thompson's ships came in fast and steep, using the gravity well of Velonia Prime to accelerate beyond their normal maximum velocity. "Weapons free," Thompson commanded. "Pour everything we have into those hive ships." Nuclear warheads and particle beams struck the massive vessels, causing visible damage to their biomechanical hulls. But the hive ships were enormous, each one over 5 kilometers long, and they could absorb tremendous punishment while continuing to function. More concerning was what the hive ships were doing while they absorbed that punishment. The energy readings from their main weapons continued to climb, and massive ports in their hulls were beginning to iris open. "Admiral," Commander Santos reported from the flagship, "we're 30 minutes from optimal firing position, but the hive ships will be ready to fire in 20 minutes. if those are planet killers. Admiral Chen made the hardest decision of her career. All task forces, emergency acceleration. Burn the engines down to the metal if you have to. We have 20 minutes to save 4 million lives. Across the human fleet, engineering officers began pushing their fusion reactors beyond every safety protocol. The older ships, already straining from hours of maximum burn, began showing signs of serious mechanical stress. But not one captain reported an inability to comply with the order. The space around Velonia Prime became a nightmare of fire and destruction as 70 human ships threw everything they had at the Zephyrian defense perimeter. Ships that had been built for exploration and colonization were fighting like frontline warships, their crews performing miracles of improvisation and courage. The destroyer TCS Valiant, part of Task Force Echo, lost her main engines to Zephyrian plasma fire but continued the attack using maneuvering thrusters and her remaining weapons. Captain Lisa Park, the ship's commander, brought her crippled vessel in close enough to ram a Zephyrian cruiser, buying precious seconds for her task force to advance. The cruiser TCS Indefatigable took a direct hit to her command center, killing Captain Johnson and most of his bridge crew. Executive Officer Commander Hayes took command and continued the attack, steering the ship manually while his communications officer coordinated with the rest of the task force. Individual acts of heroism were multiplying across the fleet, as 32,000 men and women gave everything they had to reach the hive ships before those terrible weapons could fire. On Velonia Prime, Ambassador Kexthari watched the battle through the few remaining orbital sensors her people had managed to hide from Zephyrian detection. The scale of the combat was unlike anything in recorded galactic history, not because of the size of the fleets, but because of the desperate intensity with which it was being fought. "Ambassador," General Vorthak said quietly, "the humans are dying for us. Ships that could escape are staying in the fight even when they're critically damaged." Kexthari nodded, unable to speak. She was watching beings she had never met sacrifice their lives to save people they would never know. It was simultaneously beautiful and heartbreaking. "Why?" the general asked. "Why would they do this?" "I don't know," Kexthari admitted, "but I hope we survive long enough to ask them." The final phase of the battle began when Task Force Alpha, now reduced to 6 ships, broke through the inner defensive perimeter and began their attack run on the nearest hive ship. Captain Morrison's destroyer TCS Fury led the way, her hull scarred by plasma fire but her weapons still functional. "Target the primary weapon ports," Morrison commanded. "If we can damage their main guns before they fire." The hive ship's defensive systems responded immediately, filling space with plasma bolts and biomechanical projectiles that sought out the attacking ships like living things. The destroyer TCS Phoenix took a direct hit that vaporized her entire aft section, but her captain managed to keep the ship on course long enough to deliver her full payload of nuclear torpedoes. The explosions that followed lit up the space around the hive ship like a miniature sun. When the light faded, the massive vessel was visibly damaged, her hull cracked and venting atmosphere. But she was still functional, and her primary weapon was still charging. "Admiral," Captain Morrison reported, "we've damaged the target but not destroyed it. Estimate 15 minutes until weapon discharge." Chen studied the tactical display with desperate calculation. They had hurt the Zephyrians badly, destroyed dozens of their ships, and disrupted their coordination. But it might not be enough. Then she noticed something that changed everything. "Commander Santos," she said slowly, "look at the power readings from the damaged hive ship. Compare them to the undamaged vessels." Santos ran the analysis, and her eyes widened. "Ma'am, the damaged hive ship is drawing power from the other vessels to maintain its weapon charge. They're all connected through some kind of energy distribution network." "Which means, if we can overload that network." Chen smiled grimly. "All ships, new target priority. We're not trying to destroy the hive ships anymore. We're going to make them destroy each other." The final phase of the Battle of Velonia was about to begin, and Admiral Chen had just found the weapon that might actually win it. But first, they had to survive long enough to use it. Admiral Chen's discovery of the Zephyrian power network changed the entire tactical situation in an instant. Instead of trying to destroy 12 massive hive ships with depleted ammunition and damaged vessels, She now had a target that could potentially eliminate the entire enemy command structure. "Commander Santos," she ordered, "I need a complete analysis of their energy distribution system. How are they connected? What happens if we overload it?" Santos worked frantically at her console, pulling data from sensor sweeps and combat recordings. "Ma'am, it appears to be a bioelectrical network linking all the hive ships. They share power, processing capacity, and tactical information through organic conduits that run between the vessels." "Weaknesses." "The system is designed for efficiency, not redundancy. If we can cause a feedback loop in the network, the energy discharge could cascade through all connected vessels. But it would require precise targeting of the network nodes while they're actively transferring power." Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the remaining human ships continued their desperate assault on the Zephyrian formation. They had lost 18 ships in the last hour, with many more showing critical damage. The mathematics of attrition were working against them. "How long until the planet-killer weapons are ready to fire?" 11 minutes, Admiral, maybe less." Chen opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. New mission parameters. We've identified a critical vulnerability in the enemy command structure. All task forces will coordinate a simultaneous strike on bioelectrical network nodes connecting the hive ships." She transmitted the targeting data to every ship in the fleet. "This is a precision operation. We get one chance. If we miss, Velonia Prime dies and we die with it. If we succeed, we eliminate their command structure and save 4 million lives." Across the fleet, weapons officers began reprogramming their targeting systems for the most difficult shots of their careers. The network nodes were small, well-protected, and constantly moving as the hive ships maneuvered. Hitting them would require perfect timing and exceptional marksmanship. Captain Morrison, commanding what remained of Task Force Alpha, studied the targeting data with grim determination. His force was down to 4 ships, all showing battle damage, but his weapons officer was Lieutenant Sarah Kim, widely regarded as the best gunner in the colonial fleet. "Lieutenant Kim," Morrison said, "I need you to thread a needle while riding a hurricane. Can you do it?" Kim looked at the targeting solution on her screen and nodded slowly. "Sir, I can hit it, but I'll need to get close, real close." "How close?" "Close enough to see their hull markings." Morrison didn't hesitate. "Do it." The TCS Fury accelerated toward the nearest hive ship, weaving through defensive fire with the kind of reckless skill that had made human pilots legendary throughout known space. Behind them, the 3 surviving ships of Task Force Alpha followed in tight formation, ready to provide covering fire. Meanwhile, Task Force Beta was facing similar challenges. Captain Rodriguez had lost half her ships, but the survivors were veteran crews who had learned to work together during months of patrol duty in the outer colonies. "All ships synchronize your chronometers," Rodriguez commanded. "We hit our targets simultaneously or not at all. The Admiral is counting on precise timing." Her tactical officer, Commander Mills, was running calculations on the fly. "Ma'am, the power fluctuations in their network suggest they're preparing for a massive energy transfer to the primary weapon systems, if we can hit them during the transfer." "The feedback will be amplified," Rodriguez finished. "Good thinking. All ships wait for the energy spike, then fire everything we have." Across the formation, the other task forces were making similar preparations. Each group of ships had identified their assigned targets and was maneuvering for optimal firing positions despite the intense defensive fire from the Zephyrian fleet. The casualties continued to mount. The cruiser TCS Determination took a direct hit from a bioplasma cannon and broke apart, her crew of 800 lost in an instant. The destroyer TCS Courage lost her bridge to a kinetic projectile, but continued fighting under engineering control. On the flagship, Admiral Chen watched the countdown timer reach 8 minutes and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "All ships with critical damage, break off and withdraw to minimum safe distance." "Ma'am," Captain Williams looked at her in surprise. "If this goes wrong, if we cause a chain reaction in their power network, the explosion will be visible from the next star system. I won't order damaged ships to stay when they can't contribute to the mission." Several ship captains immediately protested over the communication channel. Captain Hayes of the damaged TCS Indefatigable was particularly vocal. "Admiral, my ship can still fight. We're not abandoning the mission. Captain Hayes, your ship has no shields, no main engines, and hull breaches on 7 decks. You've done enough. Ma'am, with respect, we came here to save Valonia Prime. That mission hasn't changed. Chen looked around her command center at officers who had been with her for years, who had followed her orders through countless dangerous situations, who trusted her judgment completely. They were all looking at her with the same determination, mixed with the knowledge that some orders were wrong, no matter who gave them. Very well, she said quietly. All ships maintain formation. We finish this together. The timer reached 5 minutes. On the surface of Valonia Prime, Ambassador Kexthari received a final transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Chen's voice was calm and professional, betraying no hint of the desperate situation in orbit above. Ambassador, this is Admiral Chen. We are beginning our final attack run. Recommend all civilians shelter in place and prepare for possible seismic activity. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, know that your people fought bravely and died with honor. Kexthari realized the human admiral was saying goodbye. The transmission continued. Tell your children about today. Tell them that when your people called for help, others answered. Tell them that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. The transmission ended, leaving Kexthari staring at the communication console with tears in her eyes. Around her, the command bunker had gone completely silent as everyone absorbed the implications of the Admiral's words. General Vorthak spoke first. They're going to die for us. They're going to try to save us, Kexthari corrected. There's a difference. Above the planet, the final act of the battle began as 7 task forces of human ships accelerated toward their assigned targets. The Zephyrian defensive fire reached a crescendo, filling space with enough energy to power a small star. Ships died in brilliant flashes of light, but the survivors kept coming. The TCS Fury reached her firing position just as the Zephyrian power network spiked to maximum capacity. Lieutenant Kim had never attempted a shot this difficult under combat conditions. A moving target less than 50 meters across, protected by point defense systems and armor plating, while her own ship maneuvered at maximum velocity through hostile fire. Target acquired, she reported with professional calm. Firing. The particle beam lanced out from the Fury's main gun with perfect precision, striking the network node at exactly the moment the hive ship was channeling power to its planet-killer weapon. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Energy feedback raced through the bioelectrical network like lightning through a wire. The hive ship convulsed as systems overloaded throughout its massive structure. But instead of being isolated, the feedback spread to the connected vessels, creating a cascade failure that grew stronger as it jumped from ship to ship. Task Forces Beta, Charlie, and Delta scored hits on their assigned targets within seconds of each other, adding more energy to the growing overload. The Zephyrian power network, designed for maximum efficiency, became a weapon that turned their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. "My God," whispered Commander Santos as she watched the tactical display. "It's working." The first hive ship to succumb was the one Task Force Alpha had targeted. The energy overload reached critical levels throughout its biomechanical systems, and the massive vessel simply came apart from the inside out. Explosions rippled along its 5-kilometer length as power conduits ruptured and weapon systems detonated. But the destruction didn't stop there. The energy feedback continued racing through the network, striking the other hive ships like a plague. One by one, the massive command vessels began experiencing critical failures as their own power systems turned against them. Hive Commander Vrexthal felt something he had never experienced in his augmented existence: confusion. His tactical analysis indicated that the humans had somehow turned the collective's own technology into a weapon. The possibility had never been considered because no enemy had ever demonstrated such understanding of biomechanical systems. He issued emergency orders to sever the network connections and isolate the remaining functional hive ships, but the damage was spreading faster than his crews could respond. The humans had struck at precisely the right moment, when the network was channeling maximum power for the planetary bombardment. 3 hive ships were completely destroyed in the first wave of feedback. 4 more suffered critical damage that left them powerless and drifting. Of the 12 massive vessels that had commanded the Zephyrian fleet, only 5 remained functional. But the battle was far from over. The surviving hive ships, now isolated from their network, began operating independently with the cold efficiency that had made the Zephyrian collective feared throughout the galaxy. Their smaller ships, no longer coordinated by central command, scattered to engage individual human vessels in dozens of separate battles. "Admiral," Captain Williams reported, "the network cascade is complete, but we've still got over 400 enemy ships out there. They're no longer coordinated, but they're still individually dangerous." Chen nodded grimly. The human fleet was down to 37 functional ships, many of them damaged. Against 400 individual opponents, the odds were still impossible. "All ships," she broadcast. "Phase 3 is now in effect. We've eliminated their command structure, but Velonia Prime is still in danger. Time to show them why humans don't surrender." What followed would be remembered as the most chaotic naval engagement in galactic history, as 37 human ships took on 400 Zephyrian vessels in single combat spread across an entire solar system. The rules of conventional warfare no longer applied. This was personal now. The destruction of the Zephyrian command network had fundamentally changed the nature of the battle, but not in the way Admiral Chen had hoped. Instead of facing a coordinated fleet, her remaining ships now confronted hundreds of individual predators, each one programmed with millennia of evolutionary adaptation for killing. "Tactical assessment," Chen ordered as she watched her ships scatter across the Velonia system, each one pursued by multiple Zephyrian vessels. Commander Santos pulled up the latest battle analysis. "Ma'am, we've eliminated their strategic coordination, but their tactical effectiveness has actually increased in some areas. The individual bioships are faster and more aggressive when not constrained by fleet formation requirements." Casualty report: "We're down to 37 ships from an original 70. Enemy losses are approximately 250 vessels destroyed or disabled. But ma'am," Santos hesitated. "Speak freely, Commander." "The math still doesn't work in our favor. Even damaged, each Zephyrian bioship is roughly equivalent to one of our vessels. We're still outnumbered more than 10 to 1. Chen studied the tactical display, watching as her ships fought individual battles across the solar system. The destroyer TCS Relentless was engaged in a running firefight with 3 Zephyrian cruisers near the asteroid belt. Captain Rodriguez's TCS Defiant was using the gravity well of Velonia's outer moon to accelerate beyond pursuit velocity while trading shots with a bioship twice her size. "Admiral," Communications Officer Torres reported, "we're receiving multiple distress calls from the planet's surface. Zephyrian ground forces that were positioned for the harvest are now acting independently. They're beginning premature population collection in several major cities." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. Even if her fleet somehow managed to defeat the remaining ships in orbit, ground forces were already slaughtering civilians on the planet below. The Zephyrians might not get their organized harvest, but they were still going to murder millions of people. "Ma'am," Captain Williams said quietly, "we need to consider orbital bombardment of the ground forces." Chen shook her head immediately. "Negative. We can't save Velonian civilians by killing them ourselves. There has to be another way." She opened a channel to all ships. "Fleet command to all vessels. Priority update. Zephyrian ground forces are engaging civilian populations. Any ship with bombardment capability and clear firing solutions is authorized to provide close air support to population centers." It was a dangerous order. Orbital bombardment near civilian targets required incredible precision, and most of her ships were already engaged with enemy vessels. But across the fleet, captains began looking for opportunities to break away from their individual battles long enough to help the people they had come to save. The first to respond was Captain Lisa Chen of the destroyer TCS Fearless. She had been fighting a delaying action against 2 Zephyrian cruisers when she received the order. Her ship was damaged, her ammunition was running low, but the sensor readings from the capital city showed Zephyrian forces systematically eliminating entire city blocks. "Navigation, plot a course for low orbit over Velonia Prime. Weapons, prepare for precision bombardment." "Ma'am," her tactical officer protested, "we've still got 2 enemy ships on our tail." "Then we'll have to shoot fast and get out faster." The Fearless dove toward the planet, using atmospheric braking to achieve velocities that stressed her hull beyond design limits. Behind her, the two Zephyrian cruisers followed, gaining ground with every second. Captain Chen brought her ship down through the atmosphere until she was flying barely 100 meters above the capital city's skyline. Below, she could see Zephyrian assault troops moving systematically through residential areas, their biomechanical weapons cutting down anything that moved. Target acquired, her weapons officer reported. Zephyrian formation in Sector 7. Fire. Precision particle beams lanced down from orbit, striking Zephyrian positions with surgical accuracy. Explosions blossomed throughout the enemy formation as their assault vehicles were destroyed by weapons designed for space combat. But the victory was brief. The two pursuing cruisers caught up with the Fearless as she climbed back towards space, and their combined fire overwhelmed her shields in seconds. Captain Chen managed to transmit one final message before her ship broke apart in the upper atmosphere. Ground forces neutralized in Sector 7. Continue the mission. Similar scenes played out across the planet as human ships broke off from their space battles to provide ground support, often at the cost of their own destruction. The mathematics of the situation were unforgiving, but the human crews had long since stopped caring about mathematics. On the surface of Velonia Prime, Ambassador Kexthari watched in amazement as human ships dove through her planet's atmosphere like avenging angels, striking Zephyrian positions with impossible precision before climbing back into space to resume their battles. "They're fighting two wars at once," General Vorthak observed, "space and ground simultaneously." "No," Kexthari corrected, "they're fighting one war, the war to save our people." She activated the planetary communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. "People of Velonia, this is your ambassador. Human forces are providing close air support to our population centers. If you can identify Zephyrian ground positions, transmit coordinates on emergency frequency 7. Help our saviors help us." The response was immediate. Across the planet, civilian observers began reporting enemy positions to the orbiting human fleet. The Velonians had become active participants in their own rescue, turning the tide of the ground battle through their intimate knowledge of their world's geography. In space, the individual battles continued with desperate intensity. The cruiser TCS Indomitable was Admiral Chen's flagship, and she found herself engaged with one of the surviving hive ships in a running battle that had lasted for over an hour. The bioship was enormous, heavily armed, and seemed capable of repairing damage almost as quickly as the humans could inflict it. But Admiral Chen had noticed something during the prolonged engagement. "Commander Santos," she said during a brief lull in the firing, "analyze the enemy's repair patterns. How is it healing damage so quickly?" Santos ran the tactical analysis and her eyes widened. "Ma'am, it's not actually repairing itself. It's cannibalizing non-essential systems to maintain critical functions. Each time we damage it, the ship becomes slightly smaller but more concentrated." Chen smiled grimly. "So if we keep hurting it, eventually it will run out of non-essential systems to cannibalize. But ma'am, that could take hours, and we don't have hours." Chen studied the tactical display, noting the positions of her other ships. Most were engaged in their own battles, but a few were close enough to coordinate with. "All ships within communication range of the flagship. This is Admiral Chen. I need volunteers for a suicide run on the hive ship I'm engaging. Who's available?" The response was immediate. Captain Thompson of the TCS Vengeance. "Admiral, we're with you." Captain Hayes of the damaged TCS Indefatigable. "My ship's not pretty, but she can still fight." Commander Parker of the TCS Resolute. "Ready to follow your lead, ma'am." Chen felt a surge of pride in her crews. They had come to Velonia to save strangers, and they were prepared to die completing that mission. "All ships form up on the flagship. We're going to ram that hive ship down its throat." What followed was one of the most famous naval maneuvers in human history. 4 ships, 3 of them damaged, accelerated toward a bioship 10 times their combined mass. Their plan was simple: get close enough that the enemy couldn't bring its main weapons to bear, then pour everything they had into its critical systems. The hive ship's defensive fire was overwhelming, filling space with plasma bolts and biomechanical projectiles. The TCS Resolute took a direct hit that vaporized her forward sections, but Commander Parker kept her engines burning until the ship struck the bioship's hull and exploded. The TCS Vengeance and TCS Indefatigable made it close enough to engage at point-blank range, their weapons carving deep wounds into the massive vessel's biomechanical structure. Captain Thompson and Captain Hayes coordinated their fire with precision born of desperation, targeting the same sections repeatedly until they penetrated to vital systems. The hive ship tried to shake off its attackers like a whale trying to dislodge parasites, but the human ships clung close to its hull where its main weapons couldn't target them. The battle became a knife fight in space, brutal and personal. Finally, the combined fire from 3 ships overwhelmed the bioship's defenses. Secondary explosions began rippling through its structure as critical systems failed. The massive vessel convulsed, then broke apart in a series of spectacular explosions that lit up half the solar system. "Hive ship destroyed," Admiral Chen reported to her fleet. "All ships continue engaging enemy vessels. We're winning." And they were winning, though the cost was terrible. Across the Velonia system, human ships were proving that courage and determination could overcome superior technology and numbers, not through some miraculous advantage or secret weapon, but through the simple willingness to keep fighting when any rational person would surrender. The destroyer TCS Fury, down to emergency power and half her weapons, rammed a Zephyrian cruiser and detonated her remaining torpedoes in a suicide attack that destroyed both ships. Captain Morrison's last transmission was calm and professional. "Target eliminated. Continue the mission." The cruiser TCS Defiant, under Captain Rodriguez, led a group of 4 ships in a complex maneuver that trapped a Zephyrian formation between them and an asteroid field. Using the asteroids as cover and ammunition, they systematically destroyed 8 enemy vessels before breaking off to engage new targets. As the hours passed, the tide of battle gradually shifted. The Zephyrian individual tactics were efficient but predictable. The humans, fighting for the survival of an entire species, displayed a creativity and adaptability that the bioships couldn't match. More importantly, the human ships were coordinating their efforts even without central command. Captains who had never worked together before found ways to support each other's attacks, share ammunition and power, and coordinate complex maneuvers through pure tactical instinct. By the 18th hour of battle, Admiral Chen's fleet was down to 12 functional ships. But the Zephyrian force had been reduced to less than 50 vessels, and many of those were damaged. The impossible odds were finally becoming merely hopeless. "Admiral," Commander Santos reported, "we're receiving a transmission from outside the system. It's the Second Fleet." Chen looked up in surprise. "The Second Fleet is supposed to be defending the core worlds." "Ma'am, they're 6 hours out and requesting permission to join the engagement. They've brought everything: battleships, carriers, the works, 130 vessels." Admiral Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 hours of combat: hope. "Tell Admiral Morrison he's very welcome to join the party, but remind him that we've been at this for a while. We might need to show his people how it's done." The arrival of the Second Fleet turned the Battle of Velonia from a desperate last stand into a rout. Fresh ships with full ammunition, loads swept through the remaining Zephyrian vessels like a force of nature. Within 6 hours, the last enemy ship had been destroyed or driven from the system. Ambassador Kexthari stood on the observation deck of the Capitol building, looking up at a sky that was finally clear of enemy vessels. Around her, the survivors of Velonia Prime emerged from their shelters to witness the dawn of their liberation. General Vorthak joined her at the observation window. "Final casualty reports, Ambassador. We lost approximately 400,000 civilians during the ground assault, and military casualties were 93%. But over 3.5 million people survived." Kexthari nodded sadly. The numbers were better than anyone had dared hope when the first human ships arrived, but each casualty represented a life cut short by violence. "And the human casualties? Severe. They lost 58 ships and approximately 18,000 personnel, for people they had never met." They stood in silence for several minutes, watching as human ships took up orbital positions around their world. Medical ships were already descending to provide aid to the wounded, while engineering vessels began surveys of the damage to infrastructure. "General," Kexthari said finally, "I want a complete record made of everything that happened here. Every ship that fought, every person who died, every act of courage performed in defense of our world. Our children need to know what the humans did for us. And then we make sure we're worthy of their sacrifice. The galaxy just learned that when you call for help, humans answer. Now we need to make sure that when humans call for help, we answer too. 3 months later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council on Centauri Prime, addressing representatives from 200 species about the Battle of Velonia. Her speech was brief and to the point, very much in the human style. Honored delegates, the Zephyrian Collective was defeated not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple principle that some things are worth dying for. Every species in this galaxy has the right to exist, to grow, to reach for the stars without fear of extinction. She looked out at the assembled representatives, many of whom had refused to aid Velonia when help was most needed. The Terran Colonial Administration hereby announces the formation of the Mutual Defense Initiative. Any species that wishes to join will receive our protection in exchange for their commitment to protect others. We learned long ago that civilization is not a luxury, it's a responsibility. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 63 species requested immediate admission to the MDI. The Velonian Republic was, of course, the first to sign. And across the galaxy, the word spread that the humans had kept their promise. When someone called for help, the Deathworlders Armada answered. They always answered.